Hi, and welcome to a special post-election edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, November 18th, and who better to discuss the recently completed midterms and what's next than Mark Z. Barabak, who was on this very show not 1 month ago, did not buy the red wave, told us Republicans would probably get a plus 12 in the House and that the Senate would come down in Nevada. The only man in America who really had it right. Thanks, Bud, for coming back.
Thanks.
So there was no red wave. Why did all your colleagues, or many of your colleagues anyway, seem to buy into that particular narrative, which went off the cliff?
Well, I think it was based on history. Credit where due. I mean, I appreciate, but there were others. Simon Rosenberg, most prominently, a consultant back in D.C. Mike Lux, a name that may not be familiar to a lot of folks, but a former Clinton political hand, sent out a memo about a week or so saying, "Hey, I'm not seeing a red wave." So credit where due. Why didn't they see it? Or more to the point, why did so many people see it coming? You look at history, right? You look at history. You look at a president's approval rating. You look at things like inflation. You look at history, right? People didn't pull this out of their hat, but most of all, you look at the real story of this midterm. We can come back in a minute. We can talk about the Dobbs decision. We can talk about Trump, but it really was independent voters. I went back and I looked at midterm elections, and I don't have it off the top of my head anymore, but midterm elections going back to like 2006, where one or the other house flipped. And in most of those instances, the out party, whether it was Republicans taking over the House and the Senate or Democrats taking over, were winning independents by 12, 18, 19 points, right? Which makes sense. I mean, people who typically vote in midterm elections are people who are pissed off and they don't like the party in power and they want to send a message, right? Democrats won independents by 2 points. I mean, that is virtually unheard of in modern times. And that's really what threw a lot of people off. They looked at the numbers. You could figure Democrats were going to vote for Democrats, Republicans would vote for Democrats. The key was those independents. I don't know anyone. If you would have sat down at the beginning of this year and said inflation's going to be off the charts, Biden's going to have a 43% approval rating, gas is going to be $6 a gallon. Oh, by the way, Democrats are going to win independence. That's why so many people got it wrong.
So was it the Dobbs decision, tossing Roe v. Wade? Was it a surge in independent suburban women voters, or what do you think?
Well, it was the two Ds, Dobbs and Donald. The Dobbs decision, as you mentioned, the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, 50-year-old right, as Blackmun and others on the bench saw in the Constitution, the right to an abortion, overturned. That energized a lot of folks. And I think we talked about this on other shows. There was the referendum in Kansas, in red Kansas, where voters rejected that. We saw very high Democratic turnout in several special elections over the summer. One they lost in Omaha, but came very, very close. Another one they picked up in New York, the Alaska race, big surge in Democratic turnout. So, again, you go back to the dynamics and the fundamentals of midterms, which are typically people who are not happy, who show up to register their discontent. In this instance, Democrats were energized, and the discontent they wanted to show was with the Supreme Court and with Republicans who were talking about eliminating, outlawing, or making super restrictive the right to get an abortion. And then the other thing was Trump, who was very front and center. I mean, I can't think, I don't think you can think, or anyone alive today can think of any president, any former president who's been so prominent, right? I mean, usually what do? They go off to foreign countries and monitor elections and build houses for humanity and build their libraries, and some of them buck rake and give speeches, make a lot of money. I mean, Donald Trump has never gone away. And so he was very much a part of this election. So to fall back on the old, not cliches, but the old descriptors, typically midterms are a referendum. This was a choice election. And a lot of people, and you saw the evidence of it, there were a lot of people, if you look at the exit polls, who said, not happy with Biden. And this is another thing that defied expectation in history. A lot of people said not satisfied with Biden, but voted Democratic anyway.
Yeah. Well, let me just stick with the Dobbs thing for a minute, because the red wave brigade, it seemed to me by the last week, and I was as dreading what the results as anyone, but had sort of, we're treating Dobbs and the choice issue as kind of like this niche issue. Oh, well, there's inflation and there's gas prices and then there's abortion. But it was
Yeah.
much more than that, it appears. I mean, I'm sure we'll be looking at data for a long time, but it wasn't just another issue.
No, I think what you saw was a convergence of Dobbs and Trump and the election denialism and the big lie, all sort of falling under the umbrella of extreme, right? That the Republicans running were extreme, and again, it was a choice. It wasn't like people were doing cartwheels and throwing ticker tape parades for the Democrats, but it was a choice. And Dobbs, together with all those things I mentioned, made for a lot of people Republicans just too extreme. And so, it wasn't again they were crazy about the Democrats, but they liked them better than the perceived extremism of a lot of the Republicans who were running.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the Senate for a second. You wrote just a couple of weeks before the election that Nevada was going to be crucial, and I think the conventional wisdom was that Catherine Cortez Masto was the kind of the weak link among the Democratic incumbents, and a very good chance she was going to lose. She pulled it out. So Dems are now ahead actually 50-49 with the Georgia runoff yet to come.
Yeah.
So what happened in the end there? Was Laxalt seen as as too extreme?
Well, again, let's give blame where due. Donald Trump pretty much hand selected a lot of really lousy candidates in Pennsylvania. The quack TV Dr. Mehmet Oz, in Arizona, Blake Masters, who someone wrote a story quoting some political operative who said that the focus group response to Masters was the worst he'd ever seen any candidate. He really was a terrible candidate. And then Laxalt, who as I wrote, didn't just hitch himself to the Trump big lie bandwagon. He helped build it. He was one of the people who was there from the day after the election, making all these bogus claims about the stolen election in Nevada. I mean, he was a really, really bad candidate. But again, this time giving credit where due, and I've been on the show a lot of times and said I don't make predictions, but I did quietly whisper to a few people that I thought Cortez Masto was going to prevail, and I thought so because of the political machine that Harry Reid built, the Reid machine. It's like in sports, right? You don't just, the champion doesn't just lay down. You got to beat the champion, and I have yet to see anyone beat the Reid machine in Nevada. They're really good. They're really smart. They know how to run races in a really, really tough state. I've seen time and again them pulling out these margins, sometimes narrow, sometimes in 2010 when everyone thought Harry Reid was dead man walking at Sharon Angle, one handily. And I happened to sit down with the gal who was Harry Reid's right-hand person, gal, operative, call her what you will, a brilliant strategist by the name of Rebecca Lamb. And we were talking, and she said publicly that, Nevada's a purple state. It may have gone blue in a lot of elections, but it's a purple state and they know how to run tough elections. And she said, Harry Reid knew he wasn't immortal. He had built this machine to last. He had built it to continue after he'd left, departed, shuffled off his mortal coil. And they pulled it off. Like I said, I just, until and unless you beat the Reid machine, you got to convince me that you can do it.
Yeah, and then there was Arizona, where, of course, Mark Kelly, the incumbent, was kind of favored over Blake Masters, who is a very strange man. And let me just say parenthetically, anybody who doubts it, go look at some of these online videos that he made with his guns. I swear it looks like the digital trail left behind by some mass shooter or something. He's really kind of a strange person. But the big story there was, of course, Katie Hobbs is kind of nondescript Secretary of State eking out a victory against Carrie Lake, the former TV anchor person who has become Ms. MAGA. That was a little bit of a surprise, no?
Well, everyone I talked to said it was going to be really, really close. And I went and did a column. It might have been one of the last ones I did before the election, where I went over to Arizona. And, Arizona really was sort of, forgive the cliche, ground zero for the whole big lie denialism, right? They had that goofy audit where they were looking for like shoots of bamboo to show that ballots might have come in from China. It was this whole crazy audit that ended up giving Biden more votes than he finished with.
Election ninjas.
Election ninjas, yeah. And you had four candidates, right? Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and then Blake Masters, the Senate candidate, all of them on the big lie MAGA denying bandwagon. So I wanted to go over and talk to voters. Because, a lot of the, I'll just say, conventional wisdom was that, democracy and the threat to democracy to be like what wasn't an issue. So I just want to have some open-ended conversations with voters, which, entails one of the things I love and hate to do, which is, be this weirdo walking up to people in parking lots. But when they stopped and I started talking to them, I was surprised by how many brought that issue up unbidden, right? It was open-ended. I didn't walk up to people and say, hey, what do you think about this big lie stuff, right? I would walk up to people and say, what's on your mind? And I was surprised how many people, the very first issue that came out was the big lie, the threat to democracy. So that convinced me that, that was a real issue there. And as you suggest, Carrie Lake was, I think someone described her as the MAGA warrior queen. I mean, more than any candidate, she really embraced, her and Mastriano, the candidate, Doug Mastriano, the candidate in Pennsylvania. She's really embraced it to a point where she is the last woman standing or defeated standing who has yet to accept the results and suggesting that she's going to challenge the results. I mean, good luck with that. To my mind, what she's doing is auditioning to be Trump's running mate.
Well, and she was down in Mar-a-Lago standing next to him.
Yeah. Like I said, to me, she's auditioning for, the position of Trump running mate. Even before he gets the nomination, I wouldn't be surprised if he said, she's on the ticket, right? Double your pleasure, double your fun, cover more ground, let her run around the country spreading his big lie.
Yeah. And, before we get too carried away with democracy was on the ballot and democracy prevailed, let us note Carrie Lake got 49.7% of the vote. So 1,267,000 Arizona voters said, yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah, well, a governor runs on a lot of issues. So you could say, oh, I didn't like her thing about the big lie, but I liked her position on gas prices or what have you. Perhaps it's disturbing. I think, one of these nutty QAnon election deniers got like almost 500,000 votes in Nevada. So that's distressing. But, you look for that little ray of sunshine, right? Yes, that silver lining out there somewhere. And the bottom line is these folks lost. Now, as you point out, there are a lot of people, members of Congress who've been elected who are election deniers. You got a couple senators who are election deniers, Ron Johnson, Wisconsin, J.D. Vance in Ohio. That's worrisome. But I'm somewhat loath, given this political climate, to use the Dodger bullet metaphor, but let's just say that we tiptoed up to the edge and didn't go over. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. Two more quick things on the Senate before we move on to the House. John Fetterman not only beat Dr. Oz, he kind of stomped Dr. Oz. This guy had a stroke. And I think, again, the conventional wisdom, anybody who watched that one debate that they had where he was really stumbling for words and having a hard time being responsive, oh man, this guy's finished. But wow, just the margin itself was really surprising.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before. I mean, our politics have become so tribal. I think there were a lot of people, I know there were people who were like, wow, I'm really, really worried about this and it's troubling, but I want Democrats to take control, so I'm going to vote for this guy. The obverse, reverse, this is the problem with doing stuff live. You got to come up with these words in real time. You see a parallel situation in Georgia, right? I mean, Herschel Walker, I think you'll agree, is one of the just worst candidates who's run in a really, really long time. I mean, if you doubt it, Google Herschel Walker and vampire and werewolf.
Vampires, yeah.
Watch that riff the other day. But there's a lot of people going to vote for him. Why? Because he's got that R behind his name, and our politics have become so tribal. I think, just having that D by his name, and credit where due. John Fetterman ran a very good campaign, a very effective campaign. More to the point, Mehmet Oz ran a really bad campaign, and he was a bad candidate. I mean, the only thing he had going for him was that Donald Trump liked the way he looked on television, pushed him into that race. Again, a race that under normal, or should we say typical circumstances, you would have to think would have gone Republican, but for Mehmet Oz and the lousy campaign he ran.
Well, yeah, goes back to your point about extremism, because if you just said, sort of had a, off the assembly line of a Republican robopol, running maybe even for governor, where Mastriano really screwed the pooch on that and probably pulled Oz down even a little bit, or Oz, or And I think that was Mitch McConnell's problem with a lot of these people, because, you know, you could have nominated some normal person, sent them to Hawaii for 6 months, and they would have beat the Democrat probably in a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in the Senate, you know, where it's all my good friend, the good gentleman from blah blah blah. I mean, you know, it's all very cloaked in politics and this and that. So, you know, when Mitch McConnell says candidate quality is an issue, I mean, you know that his hair is on fire.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and then just to close on with the Georgia runoff, Reverend Warnock got only 17% of the vote of evangelicals, and he's an actual minister to Herschel Walker. So there does tell you something about tribal politics, but that's going to be a big deal. A lot of money going to be spent. Is Trump going to stay out of that, do you think, or what do you hear?
I don't know, boy. I don't know if he can help himself. I mean, he's already been interjected into it. You know, he mentioned it in his Trump mentioned the Georgia Senate race in his announcement speech the other night, and immediately the Warnock campaign cut an ad saying, "Stop Herschel Walker, stop Donald Trump." So whether Donald Trump wants to or not, you know, he's inserted himself. And you know, I think that the fact that the Senate is not on the line helps Democrats, only because I think there will be a lot of Republicans who will just say, "I don't like Herschel Walker anyway. What's the point? Democrats already won." Democrats, by contrast, are very, very energized still. You know, they're making the case that, hey, if we can take this seat, that means we Democrats no longer have to bow at the feet of Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema. It gives Biden a cushion, and it also practically makes a huge difference in terms of this structure of the Senate, right? If it's a 50-50 tie, committees are divided 50-50. If Democrats can pick up that Georgia seat, they're in the clear majority. They can, you know, have majorities in each of those committees. That makes a big difference in terms of moving Biden's agenda forward. So in terms of incentive and which side is incentivized, I would argue that Democrats are much more incentivized than Republicans right now in Georgia.
All right. All right. Well, we'll watch that one. All right. On to the House. As of this morning, Republicans have cinched control with 218 votes, which is what 218 seats, which is what it takes. It's 218 to 212 with 5 to call, 4 of which I believe are in California. So it looks like our Mike Kevin is going to have somewhere between 220 and 222 seats, which would give him at max a 9-seat margin. What's that going to be like? Well, first of all, do you think that McCarthy's going to be able to convince all of the new extremists, even in the Republican caucus, to vote for him for Senate? He lost 31 votes in the caucus, but that's an easy vote to take because it's just the nomination.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend that I've had a lot of conversations with folks. I mean, I do know that there are a lot of people who say they're adamantly 100% never, ever, ever going to vote for Kevin McCarthy. I mean, I think it's very much up in the air whether he becomes Speaker or not. I mean, this has been his lifelong dream. There's a really good question whether or not he will become Speaker, and you know who the alternative might be. If he does become Speaker, it could become one of those, you know, watch what you wish for things. I mean, I can't imagine he's going to have a lot of really, really happy days because, I mean, I mentioned Joe Manchin. You know, when you have that small of a majority, basically everyone can be a kingmaker. Everyone can hold you up and jack you up. Well, if I'm going to vote for this, this is what I want. I mean, we're going to get around to Nancy Pelosi, I know, shortly. But, you know, one thing that Nancy Pelosi was absolutely masterful, I mean, truly masterful at, was holding together. She had an even narrower margin, but she was incredibly skilled at holding Democrats together on a lot of really, really tough votes. I have yet to be convinced that Kevin McCarthy, and maybe I'll be wrong, I have yet to be convinced that he has that kind of skill to hold together what's going to be a very, very narrow majority and an extremely unwieldy Republican conference.
Well, and you already see evidence of that with the Cuckoo Caucus, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Paul Gosar, that whole collection of Star Wars bar scene patrons. You know, the thing they wanted out of Kevin McCarthy was to be able to do an investigation that the insurrectionists have been mistreated by the Department of Justice,
Right.
that, and of course Hunter Biden's laptop. Now there's a couple of kitchen table issues.
I was going to say that's definitely going to help with that's definitely going to help win back Pennsylvania and all these swing voters for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, in a certain sense, it'll. Oh, I think I can extend this metaphor. So if Kevin becomes the dog who caught the car, then Marjorie Taylor Greene becomes the tail wagging the dog.
The tail wagging the dog that caught the car. Yeah, that's good. I like it.
All right. Let me ask you about a couple of these California seats, and I know I haven't been covering them on the ground, but just I know you hear a lot of stuff. There's this, I guess it's an open seat, California 13, which has been back and forth since election night. And the Republican Duarte and the John Duarte and Adam Gray is the Democrat.
Yeah.
I think Duarte is up by a couple hundred now, but does that look like it's over, or do you think that's may go?
Well, I think, I would put it this way. I would rather be in Duarte's shoes, given, it all comes down at this point to, we can stop saying it all comes down to turnout. It all comes down to what votes remain to be counted from where. My understanding is that the outstanding votes are coming from places that Duarte has done very well. So again, I would rather be in his shoes than not. And, if I can just as an aside, you and I are old enough to remember when there were no competitive congressional races in California, right? The seats were so gerrymandered. I've written this before. There was a period from 2001 to 2009 or 10 when there were like hundreds of congressional races throughout California. In that whole decade, one seat here in the Bay Area traded hand. So, credit where due. Voters wanted to shake things up. They came up with a commission, and here we are talking about 10 competitive congressional seats. Now, to get back to it, there's another seat we did, actually, a colleague of mine, Tom Kerwin, did a great piece on this crazy long district that starts up by Tahoe and goes all the way down to Death Valley. That's a Republican-leaning district. I think it's going to go Republican. I think Kevin Kiley, the assemblyman, is going to win that seat. The holdup is there's something like 10 counties. And so it's taken quite a while for all those votes to trickle in. The really, really close one, of course, is David Valadao running against Rudy Salas in the Central Valley. That's a seat that's gone back and forth. You might remember, although you probably won't, because you're normal people and you don't remember these sorts of things, so I'll refresh for you. Valadao loses to T.J. Cox. Right. Valadao beats T.J. Cox. Now he's had a very, very competitive race. Rudy Salas was the Democrats' dream candidate, quote unquote. They tried to get in there for a really, really long time. As the vote now stands, Valadao is up by a few hundred votes, but my understanding is that there's a large segment of votes yet to be counted from Kern County, which is Rudy Salas country. Now, what's the complicating thing? They have one counting machine. That one counting machine is broken. So if your listeners all want to chip in, maybe send $1 here, $5 there, maybe we can buy them a sorting machine, and we'll know before Christmas who's going to represent that district.
Yeah, well, that has a lot of interesting elements to it, that race anyway, because Valadao was one of the few Republican House members who voted for impeachment, the second impeachment, as it were. And
he was, and I can tell you, Valadao is personally very close to Kevin McCarthy, and it's my understanding that this is one instance where McCarthy got Trump just to lay off. You'll notice that Trump was not a presence in that district. He did not go after Valadao the way he went after a lot of others who voted for impeachment. So that is one case where Kevin McCarthy's intervention, I think, really, really helped David Valadao.
All right. So, and one more thing about California, because there's some interest about 26, CD 26 here, because it's fairly close. We were Christy Smith, who had I think this was the third matchup against Mike Garcia, the Republican incumbent, and really got stomped. But then, kind of unusually came out on Twitter and elsewhere in your paper, really complaining about the way the DCCC, the Democratic campaign committee in Washington, treated her or didn't treat her by not giving her any money. And their excuse was it's too expensive to put into the LA media market. Is that really what's going on there? Is that?
I think, yeah. I think there's a couple things. I think Christy Smith was correct to the extent that the D-triple-C, the D-trip, as politicos call it, didn't have a lot of faith in her. She was not their pick to run again. So she had that going against her. But, I've written the iterations of this story many, many times before. Those of us in California, particularly Republicans, how many times they hear Republicans say, if only they'd put some money here, we could win these races. I'm talking about presidential races, Senate races. But, from the perspective of a campaign committee, you can buy one ad in California, or with the money you spend in California, you can buy an ad in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, right? California is super expensive. LA is the most expensive part of a super expensive state. So I think there is something to that. I think when you're looking at the map and you're looking at investment, yes, that is a district that by all rights should have flipped, voted overwhelmingly for Biden. Mike Garcia is one of the election deniers, voted against certifying the election. So, that's bad. And to my mind, he should have been voted out on that alone. But from a practical, strategic point of view, it does make sense. You understand why, again, rather than spending an ad on, for one ad in LA, you could sprinkle that money around the country and have a much greater impact. So, it was Christy Smith's fortune, A, to be running in California, and B, to be Christy Smith, who, as I said, the D-trip just did not have a lot of confidence in.
No, in fact, they brought up some guy from San Diego or something to run against her, and she beat him though. And so that was a problem. And just to get in the weeds for 1 second, of course, that's the former Katie Hill district, the woman who brought us the word throuple, and she was on Twitter last night, vowing that Mike Garcia would not win again, which sounds suspiciously like she thinks she's going to run again. And Christie actually made a sort of under the radar poke at her for not going away too. So I think there's that. All right. Meanwhile, in Mar-a-Lago, the former president of the United States decided that a couple of days after the midterms would be a good time to announce he's running again. And I would say, well, I didn't watch Fox, so I don't know how it played on Fox, but he really got panned, for the speech, for the strategy, for locking people in the ballroom when they tried to leave. What was your takeaway on that?
Like a lot of the reviews, I thought it was forgive the obvious, but it was low energy. It was not. It just had sort of a go through the motions feel to it. Both, as you suggest, for the people in the ballroom, some of whom were caught on videotape trying to leave and were locked in. Talk about a hostage video. They couldn't get out. It was very clear that my understanding is that a lot of Trump's advisors said, don't run. So the compromise he made was to not do the usual Trumpian stuff, but to stick to a script. And, we've seen this before, right? Does the word pivot ring a bell? How many times did we hear the pivot? Always pivoting, right? He would deliver a State of the Union address where he would stick to the text and people would say, oh, it's a new Trump, he's pivoted, right? So, it was Trump reading from a script, which is just not, the Trump that excites his base. That said, a colleague of mine, Melanie Mason, had a really smart story this morning. There's a lot of talk among, we'll shorthand this for discussion's sake, among elites, right? Among the National Review crowd, among Fox commentators, among a lot of the electeds, saying it's time to cut Trump loose. And if you want to be, if you want to get down to it, it's like, insurrection's okay, impeachment is fine, just don't cost us elections, right? So all of a sudden, a lot of Republicans are finding their voice. Question is, can someone shake that base of Trump's, right? There was an NBC poll that I quoted in my column about the announcement that showed 62% of folks surveyed, Republicans surveyed, said they identify more with the Republican Party than with Trump, right? Which is the highest it's been since that question was asked in January 19, which is considerable until you figure that's 30% or so, and some estimates go as high as 40% of the Republican base is hardcore committed to Trump. Now, 30% isn't enough to win elections, nor is 40%, but it could be enough to win a primary. So again, if we see a very large field, if we see what we saw in 2016, which was a lot of people making the calculation, by people, I mean Republican candidates made the calculation, this guy can't win. I don't want to alienate his supporters, so I'm not going to attack him. And by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. You had Trump as the nominee. So the question is anyone going to take him on? We haven't talked yet about Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis, who had a great night. If there was a Republican wave, it was kind of limited to a couple states. Florida, big Republican wave. New York, Republican wave. DeSantis is the flavor of the moment. You have a meeting in Vegas. The Republican Jewish Coalition has a cattle call every couple of years. A whole bunch of candidates are going to be out there. DeSantis, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Ted Cruz, on and on and on. A lot of people making noises like they might run. The question is, does someone, and how many people run? And if they do run, how aggressively are they going to go after Trump? My sense is he's not going to get the free ride he got the last time.
Yeah. Well, and that's the question. I heard David Korn, the editor of Mother Jones, on his analysis yesterday. I don't want to steal it, but it was like, you still got to take him on. I mean, what happened in 2016 was everybody wanted to be the second guy to do it. Right. You go take him on and I'll benefit, but that's not going to work. So that, is DeSantis going to do that? I mean, DeSantis has, he has some standing with the Trump base, but gee whiz, you still got to go out there and get your face torn off and have some awful nickname.
You do, but I talked to a Republican. Well, she's a pollster who works for a lot of Republicans. Really, really smart woman by the name of Christine Matthews, and she shared some of what she's been finding in focus groups. And she said these are conversations with Trump supporters who said that they are ready to move on. Many of them, not for the reasons, not that they think that Trump is a loser, quote unquote, but because they think he just can't get a fair shake and he just can't win. Not because he's bad. They love what he did as president. How many times did I hear this when I did interviews? Don't like the tweeting, don't like the name calling, but like his policies. And that's how a lot of these people feel. And she suggests that a lot of them are ready to move on. And a lot of them are very interested in Ron DeSantis. So we'll see. I mean, look, we both know how many canvas candidates came along, right? It was going to be Jeb Bush, and then it was going to be Scott Walker. So you're right. It's like you can look great on paper, and you can win this super impressive landslide victory like Ron DeSantis did. But you got to go out there, as you said. You got to go in the ring. You got to get your nose blooded. You got to take a punch, and we'll see if he can.
Yeah. Well, and I think another key factor there is kind of the right wing media ecosystem and what you saw with the Murdochs this week. I have to. The New York Post, really, if anybody hasn't seen it, they have a great headline.
Classic.
Florida man makes announcement.
Yeah.
Put Trump's announcement on page 26 and just savaged him.
They did.
And what Sean Hannity cut away from the speech, right? Night. So who knows?
That's the question. I mean, look, I have no doubt that if Trump were to be the nominee again, they will come back 100%, be whole hog behind him. But what'd your old friend say? You don't need to call Western Union to send a message. I don't know. Does Western Union even exist anymore? Do people even send telegrams anymore?
You're kind of dating yourself, I think.
I was gonna say I'm not that old, but anyway.
All right. Speaking of dating ourselves,
yes,
Nancy Pelosi stepped back as Speaker this week, and I think it's not enough to say she's a generational political talent, but a multi-generational one, because we started covering her when we were both young.
Yes,
tells you something. You think that's a good move for her? As the Democrats are going to be on defense. Hakeem Jeffries, the congressman from New York, is going to, I guess, go all in for majority leader. Just what's your analysis of that whole situation?
It's funny. Your viewers are seeing two of the people who actually covered that race back to the San Francisco Chronicle, the very first time when she ran in '87. And you're right. She is truly, I've done a lot of reporting over the years. I've talked to folks, and she will go down in history as one of the great speakers. Right up there with, Sam Rayburn, the 20th century, Henry Clay of the 19th century. She truly was and will be remembered as a historic and epic figure. That said, she gave her word. She said that she was going to step down. She was on pretty shaky ground in 2018. Even then, there were a lot of younger, ambitious members of the House who wanted her to move on. And she gave her word at the time that she would serve 2 more terms as Speaker, which takes her into January. She said her phone was, quote, quote, blowing up in the last few days with people urging her to reconsider. And I have no reason to doubt her. But, one of Nancy Pelosi's great skills, as I said in a column this morning, is she knows how to count votes. She knows how to read a room. I think she knew that, now is a good time to make her exit. She could do so gracefully. She could do so, without emerging under I was going to go with the cloud metaphor, but I'm trying to see how I can turn cloud into a red wave, right? But the red wave didn't come. So it's not like she's leaving after Democrats were blown out. She could leave, with her head high, having helped prevent that red wave. I mean, she's a phenomenal fundraiser. She's raised $1 billion. That's with a B, $1.25 billion for Democrats since joining the leadership. She's truly phenomenal. I've traveled on the road with her. She is indefatigable for a woman of 82. She's really a remarkable politician, which is why she's been such a target. If you think about it, right? I mean, Dennis Hastert or Paul Ryan or any of these other folks who cycled through, right? They never became issues. And why was she a target? Because she was so very effective. So the bottom line is, I will confess I was surprised. I really didn't expect her to stay in Congress. I figured, she'd be like, time to take my leave. But I think it's fair to say she will be unlike any other quote, quote, backbencher. She said, I'm not going to meddle. I'm not going to second guess, but you can be sure that she'll be around. If people are smart, they'll look for her advice because, again, tremendously effective. She is, as you suggested, a multi-generational political talent phenomenon. I want to add one last thing. I was just my daughter is in town visiting, and we were talking yesterday about Pelosi. And a lot of people don't realize she was 49 years old. She had raised 5 kids. 49 before she wasn't one of these people who started. I mean, she was politically involved as a fundraiser and hosting candidates, but she wasn't someone who ran for young Democrats when she was 12 years old. 49 years old before she was elected to political office. Truly a remarkable career.
Yeah. Do you think, and this is kind of a second or third level issue, but do you think that her doing this in a subtle way kind of puts pressure on Biden to not run? It's time for a new generational kind of thing, or am I just making that up? Well, I am.
No. I mean, to the extent it'll be part of the conversation now, and people like you and others will bring it up as part of the conversation. I think at the end of the day, I think Biden will leave it up to his family and say, "What do you think?" and take their advice. And then I think he will size up whether he thinks he can run or not. I think he would be more incentivized to run if it was Trump, because he feels that he's beaten him once, would like to beat him a second time. I don't live inside Joe Biden's head, and I don't profess to know his thinking. I would think that he is mindful that there's not a lot of confidence in his vice president, Kamala Harris, who is the obvious front runner were he not to run. I don't think she would, in fact, I can virtually guarantee that she wouldn't get it by acclamation. There would be a really tough fight. So I think there's going to be a lot of things that will go into Biden's calculation. Number one, family. Number two, who's the best person to beat whoever runs again? And Biden's got a lot of pride. And I did a column the day after the election, takeaways, and I said, Joe Biden may be the most underestimated politician of a generation of our lifetime, right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember people are laughing about how terribly it was in the debates and talking about record players and all this stuff and no way, no how. And he was humiliated in Iowa, he was humiliated in New Hampshire, didn't do that great in Nevada, and went South Carolina. Boom, he's the nominee, right? His legislative agenda was dead. He was stumbling, he was fumbling, couldn't get anything done, and then boom, passes the most legislation since LBJ. So, I wouldn't bet against Joe Biden.
All right. And what about our other political senior citizen from San Francisco, Senator Feinstein? She really got some bad coverage this week. I don't know if you saw the op-ed in the Chronicle this week by Gil Duran, who used to work for her, and he actually used to work for everybody, as far as I can tell. But I thought it made a lot of sense. Stop telling her to resign and stuff, and she'll bow out gracefully, or she should bow out gracefully. And at the end of
yeah, I've been on that bandwagon, as they say. You could look it up. I've been writing that for the last, and I'm not in any way detracting what Gil had to say, but I've been on that bandwagon for a long time. Good enough is good enough. It's not great. There's something to me unseemly about one person, Gavin Newsom, appointing 2 senators, represent 40 million people. So I've been saying for a really long time, let her serve her term. Let her do it with dignity. Obviously, if she's incapacitated to a point where she can't function and serve as senator, then it would be time for her to go. I haven't seen any evidence of that. I think, like a lot of people of an advanced age, she has good days, she has bad days. Nothing that convinces me she should be forced to resign. We're now, minutes, hours, weeks away from a 2024 Senate race starting. There are no certainties in life. I would be shocked if Feinstein were to say she's going to run again. I'm pretty certain, based not on anything she's told me, pretty certain she's going to say, I'm done. And then let the campaign begin and let voters decide who they want to represent them. There's a year left on her term. I think she should be allowed to serve out. In fact, I think one of the headlines on one of the columns was, stop hounding Dianne Feinstein, just let her serve her time. And I still feel that way. And so I second what Gil Duran wrote.
Although there was some practical importance that sort of came to light, which was she was in line to be the Senate pro tem, and she therefore would have been the third in line to the presidency, and for whatever reason stepped aside for Patty Murray of Washington. But then, the story was that she told a reporter she hadn't even thought about it, and she didn't know what she was going to do. So that was.
Look, again, good days, bad days. I don't think it's a revelation to anyone that she's doesn't have the physical stamina, the mental sharpness that she once did. And I did another column, not to sit here and give you Mark Z. Barabak's greatest hits, but I did a column sometime back. The headline was "The Tragedy of Dianne Feinstein," and the tragedy of Dianne Feinstein is, people kind of know this last act. You and I both have known Feinstein for a really long time. We've both been on the receiving end of the wrath of Dianne Feinstein for things we said and did. And Dianne Feinstein, like Nancy Pelosi, will be remembered and should be remembered as truly a historic figure. A path breaker, a glass ceiling breaker, someone who held San Francisco together after a very traumatic time, the City Hall assassinations, passed major legislation protecting the California desert, gun control legislation.
She got the torture. She got the torture report made.
Yeah, the torture report. She passed an assault weapons ban. So I'm not singing here, sitting here singing the glory of Dianne Feinstein. But the tragedy, to my mind, is that people only remember this final act because she's so much more than what people have seen these last couple of years. And I think the tragedy would be if people don't take into account all she's accomplished over the course of a very long and very illustrious career.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to leave it on your point of we've been on the receiving end of it by just recounting really briefly. I think Dianne Feinstein's greatest pushback on a story. You and I used to have a colleague, the late Reggie Smith, worked at the Chronicle and covered City Hall for a while. And the biggest issue, of course, to all of us was whether or not we were going to get a new ballpark in San Francisco. And she was forever trying to do it. And they had some draft report about putting it at 7th and Mission, or I don't know where the hell they were going to put. Anyway, Reggie got a hold of it and we put it in the paper, and it was on the front page. And Dianne hates leaks more than anything. So she summoned Reggie to her office and, pounding her fist, she said, I don't want any more of those premature ejaculations in the newspaper. So that was
that's classic. Yes, I used to be like being called the principal's office. I was called the principal's office a few times. I'd forgotten that. Yeah, classic. Reggie, may you rest in peace.
All right. Mark Z. Barabak, political columnist for Los Angeles Times. As always, thank you so much for your time and your insights, for coming back. The only man who was right about the midterms. Okay, there were a couple others, but he was the only one right on our show. So thanks. We'll talk to you in the new year.
All right. It was fun. Thanks for having me again.